Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you today. Let's dive into something that impacts us all: respect. When people disrespect you, the first thing to do is set clear boundaries. Communicate what's acceptable and stand firm. Stay calm when disrespected. Your composure shows strength and keeps you in control. Address the behavior directly but respectfully, using honest communication to clarify how their actions affect you. If disrespect continues, evaluate the relationship. Sometimes walking away is the healthiest choice. Above all, lead by example. Treat others with respect, even when they don't reciprocate. Your actions reflect your character and set a powerful standard. By staying true to yourself, you inspire respect from others and maintain your dignity. Setting clear boundaries is one of the most important things we can do to protect our time, energy, and self-worth. It's easy to overlook, especially when we're busy trying to please others or when we're concerned about making people happy. But here's the truth: if we don't set boundaries, we leave ourselves vulnerable to being taken advantage of, to being disrespected, and to losing our sense of self. Boundaries are a reflection of our values, and they are essential in defining how we want to be treated. Imagine for a moment that you are a leader in a team, or perhaps in a relationship, and someone is consistently crossing the line, disregarding your time or your feelings. How do you handle that? It starts with recognizing that you are worthy of respect. Respect isn't something that you beg for. It's not something that you wait for someone else to give you. It's something that you give yourself by setting clear boundaries. Now, I want you to think about the last time you felt disrespected. Maybe it was someone talking over you in a meeting, or perhaps someone constantly interrupting you when you're trying to share your thoughts. Maybe it was someone belittling your ideas or dismissing your contributions. You know the feeling I'm talking about, the feeling of being diminished, as if your worth is suddenly less than what it truly is. That's the feeling of someone violating your personal boundaries. The key to handling people who don't respect you is to stop accepting this behavior. The first step is to set boundaries, firm ones. Boundaries are the lines we draw in the sand, saying, this is where I stand, this is what I will tolerate, and this is what I will tolerate, and this is what I will not. It's not about being aggressive, it's about being assertive. It's not about creating conflict, it's about making sure that you are protecting yourself and your values. When we set boundaries, we send a message. We say to ourselves, I am worthy of respect, and I won't allow anyone to treat me in a way that undermines that. And when we communicate these boundaries to others, we give them the opportunity to adjust their behavior. Some people may be unaware that they're crossing a line, and simply letting them know where that line is can make all the difference. But here's the thing: setting boundaries is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing process. People will test your boundaries. They'll see how much they can get away with. And when they do, you need to stand firm. Because if you don't, if you allow those boundaries to be breached without consequence, you're teaching people that it's okay to disrespect you. Think about the impact of not having boundaries. If we don't set clear boundaries, we may find ourselves constantly bending to the will of others. We may be overwhelmed, overworked, and exhausted because we never said no. We might become resentful, frustrated, and even bitter because we allowed ourselves to be treated poorly. But when we set boundaries, we take control of our lives. We decide what we will accept and what we won't. But I'm not just talking about setting boundaries with others, I'm also talking about setting boundaries with yourself. Sometimes the biggest hurdle we face is learning to say no to our own tendencies to please others. We need to recognize that saying no isn't a sign of weakness or selfishness. It's an act of self-respect. It's an acknowledgement that we have limits, and those limits deserve to be honored. When you set boundaries, you set the tone for how you expect to be treated. You stop waiting for people to respect you. You show them how. You teach them how to interact with you in a way that reflects the respect you give yourself. You don't have to be harsh or confrontational about it. You simply need to communicate clearly, consistently, and respectfully. And let me be clear, setting boundaries doesn't mean you're being inflexible. It doesn't mean you're unwilling to compromise or collaborate. It means that you value yourself enough to protect your peace and your space. It means you're willing to stand up for what's important to you. It means you're no longer willing to tolerate disrespect, not because you're better than anyone else, but because you know that you deserve to be treated with dignity. Some people may push back. They might not like your boundaries. They may try to guilt you or manipulate you into crossing those lines. But this is where the real work begins: standing firm. People who don't respect boundaries will often test them. They might try to make you feel guilty, or they might try to make you feel like you're being unreasonable. But the truth is, you're not being unreasonable. You're being responsible. I know this might be uncomfortable for some of you, It's not easy to stand up for yourself, especially if you've spent years allowing others to walk all over you. It's not easy to say no when you've been conditioned to say yes. But I want to remind you that you are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to protect your time, your energy, and your well-being. You are not here to serve the comfort of others at the expense of your own. And once you set those boundaries, the next step is to enforce them. This is where the real change happens. It's one thing to say, I won't tolerate this behavior. It's another thing to act on it when the behavior continues. When someone crosses a boundary, you have to be willing to speak up. You have to be willing to say, that behavior is not acceptable, and I will not allow it. At first, people might be taken aback. They might not know how to respond because they're used to you tolerating things you don't want to tolerate. But when you consistently stand firm, they'll begin to understand. They'll begin to realize that you're serious about your boundaries. And that's when respect begins to take root. You may also face resistance from people who are not accustomed to having boundaries set with them. They may try to push you, to challenge you, to make you question your decisions, but this is where your clarity comes into play. When you know your worth and you've made the decision to set boundaries, no one can shake that foundation. No one can undermine the strength of your commitment to yourself. And remember, this setting boundaries isn't just for your protection. It's for the protection of the relationships around you. When you set clear boundaries, you are teaching others how to treat you with respect. You are helping to create an environment where mutual respect can flourish. You're showing others that it's not okay to take advantage of people, to cross lines, or to disrespect others. This isn't about being perfect. This isn't about making everyone like you. It's about creating an environment where you can thrive, where you can do your best work, and where you can build healthy, respectful relationships. When you set clear boundaries, you create the space for others to do the same. So I challenge you today to take a hard look at the boundaries in your life. Are they clear? Are they strong? Are you honoring them, or are you allowing them to be crossed? Remember, you don't have to be aggressive or confrontational to set boundaries. You just have to be firm and consistent. You have to be willing to protect your peace and stand up for what's important to you. The more we honor our own boundaries, the more we teach others to honor them too. And in doing so, we create a world that is built on mutual respect, where we no longer have to tolerate disrespect, but can instead thrive in environments that nurture our well-being, our growth, and our ability to lead with integrity. All right, let's talk about something we all encounter in life dealing with people who don't respect us. It's not easy, is it? It challenges us on a deeply personal level. But I believe moments like these can shape us into stronger, more grounded individuals if we handle them thoughtfully. Here's what I've learned about staying calm and composed when confronted with disrespect. You see, when someone disrespects you, their actions say more about them than about you. It's often not about your worth, your values, or what you bring to the table. Instead, it reflects their frustrations, insecurities, or unresolved issues. And the moment you recognize this, you gain the upper hand not over them, but over your emotions. Because at that moment, you can choose how you respond. The thing about disrespect is that it's like bait. It's tempting to react emotionally, to defend yourself, or to lash out. But ask yourself, what do you gain by reacting in anger or frustration? Do you feel more in control? Do you walk away feeling proud of how you handled it? More often than not, reacting emotionally leaves us feeling drained and powerless. That's why staying calm is so critical. It's not about letting people walk all over you. It's about showing strength and restraint. When you stay calm, you send a powerful message. Your actions don't control me. I control me. When I talk about staying calm, I don't mean bottling up your feelings or pretending everything is fine. That's not healthy, and it's certainly not productive. Staying calm means pausing. It means taking a deep breath and choosing to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. Imagine you're in the middle of a heated conversation and someone says something that's outright disrespectful. What if, instead of firing back, you simply pause? What if you gave yourself the gift of a moment to think before you speak? That pause can make all the difference. And here's why: when you pause, you create space for clarity. In that space, you can decide what you want your response to achieve. Do you want to escalate the situation, or do you want to diffuse it? Do you want to stand up for yourself in a way that commands respect, or do you want to stoop to their level? That moment of calm allows you to align your actions with your values. It allows you to protect your peace and dignity. Now, let's not pretend this is easy. Staying calm requires practice. It's like building a muscle. The more you do it, the stronger you become. But in the beginning, it takes effort. You'll have moments where you want to snap, where you want to yell, or where you feel overwhelmed by frustration. That's normal. But each time you choose calmness over chaos, you're training yourself to handle difficult situations with grace. Let me share a story about someone I know who exemplified this beautifully. She worked in a high-pressure job with a boss who constantly undermined her. Every time she presented an idea, he would dismiss it. Every time she spoke up in a meeting, he would cut her off. It was infuriating. She could have reacted angrily, and no one would have blamed her. But instead, she chose to stay calm. She chose to address the behavior, not with anger, but with clarity. One day, after another dismissive comment, she stayed behind after the meeting and said to him, "I've noticed that when I share my ideas, they're often dismissed without discussion. I'd like to understand if there's something I can do differently to communicate more effectively." That simple, calm statement changed the dynamic between them. It made him pause. It made him think. And over time, it improved their working relationship. What's the lesson here? Calmness isn't weakness, it's strength. It's saying, I'm confident enough in myself that I don't need to yell to be heard. I don't need to attack to defend my worth, and that kind of strength is undeniable. It commands respect. Now, let's talk about something else that's crucial when dealing with disrespect boundaries. You see, staying calm doesn't mean tolerating bad behavior. It doesn't mean letting people treat you poorly without consequences. Calmness is the foundation, but boundaries are the structure. When someone disrespects you, it's an opportunity to teach them how you expect to be treated. And the way you do that is by setting clear boundaries. Here's the thing about boundaries, they're not about controlling other people. You can't control how someone acts, but you can control what you're willing to tolerate. You can control how you respond. Boundaries are about protecting your energy, your time, and your self-respect. They're about saying, this is what's acceptable in my life, and this is what isn't. Setting boundaries doesn't have to be confrontational. It can be as simple as saying, I don't appreciate being spoken to that way, or if this behavior continues, I'll need to step away from this conversation. It's about being firm but respectful. And yes, it can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you're not used to asserting yourself. But the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. I want you to think about the people in your life who have earned your respect. Chances are, they're not people who let others walk all over them. They're people who stand up for themselves with dignity and grace. They're people who know their worth and who expect others to treat them accordingly. That's what boundaries do. They communicate your worth not in words, but in actions. But what happens when someone doesn't respect your boundaries? What if they continue to treat you poorly, even after you've made it clear that their behavior is unacceptable? That's when you need to evaluate the relationship. Not every relationship is meant to last. And that's okay. If someone consistently disrespects you, despite your efforts to address the behavior, it might be time to walk away. Walking away isn't about giving up. It's about choosing your well-being over a toxic relationship. It's about saying, I deserve better than this. And yes, it can be painful. It can be painful. It can be hard to let go of someone you care about or to leave a situation you've invested time and energy into. But sometimes walking away is the most respectful thing you can do for yourself and for the other person. So let's bring this full circle. Staying calm, setting boundaries, and evaluating relationships are all connected. They're all about taking ownership of how you respond to disrespect. They're about protecting your peace and dignity, even in the face of challenging situations. And when you approach disrespect with this mindset, you're not just handling the situation, you're growing through it. You're becoming stronger, more self-aware, and more grounded. When someone disrespects you, it's easy to feel slighted, hurt, or even furious. And let's be honest, our first instinct in those moments might be to react. Maybe we want to snap back, assert dominance, or retreat entirely. But here's the thing, handling disrespect isn't about getting even, nor is it about shrinking ourselves. It's about standing in our truth and addressing the behavior directly. Imagine that someone says something that cuts deep. It's not just a passing comment, it's intentional. You feel the sting, and in that moment, you have a choice. Do you let it slide, swallow your feelings, and let resentment fester? Or do you face it head on with courage and grace? I say you face it. Because when you address disrespect, you're not just standing up for yourself, you're also setting the standard for how people can treat you. Addressing the behavior directly starts with self-awareness. It's not about reacting in anger or frustration. Those emotions may be valid, but they don't drive productive outcomes. What we need to do is pause, breathe, and center ourselves. We need to ask, what is it about their behavior that bothers me? Is it the words they've used? Their tone? Their actions? Clarity is key. If you don't know what exactly is bothering you, how can you communicate it? Once you're clear, it's about timing and delivery. You don't have to call someone out the moment they disrespect you, especially if emotions are running high. Wait until you can have a calm and focused conversation. Remember, you're not attacking the person, you're addressing the behavior. There's a big difference. It's not you're rude or you're disrespectful instead. Try when you said specific remark, it felt dismissive, and I'd like to understand why you said it. Do you see the shift? It's about speaking to the action, not the person's character. This approach isn't just about confrontation, it's about fostering understanding. Sometimes people don't even realize they've crossed a line. Maybe they're projecting their own insecurities or frustrations. Maybe they're just unaware. By addressing the behavior directly, you give them a chance to see the impact of their actions. And more often than not, people appreciate the honesty. They may not admit it immediately, but over time they will respect you for being upfront. Now, let's not sugarcoat this. It's not always easy. Sometimes the person won't respond well. They might get defensive or dismissive. And that's okay. Your goal isn't to control their reaction, it's to express your truth. You can say, I'm not here to argue. I just wanted to share how I felt and why this matters to me when you frame it like that. You shift the focus from conflict to communication. This is about self-respect. When you address disrespect, you're telling the world, I value myself enough to speak up, you're setting a precedent. People will notice. They'll understand that you're not someone who tolerates being treated poorly. This doesn't make you difficult or confrontational, it makes you someone who values respect for themselves and others. Think about a workplace scenario. Maybe a colleague constantly interrupts you during meetings. It's subtle, but it chips away at your confidence. You could let it slide, hoping they'll stop. But chances are, they won't. If anything, it might get worse. Or you could take them aside and say, I've noticed that during meetings, you often cut me off when I'm speaking. I want to make sure my ideas are heard, and I'd appreciate it if you could let me finish before jumping in. You've called out the behavior, but in a way that's constructive, not combative. Addressing disrespect doesn't always mean you'll get the outcome you want. Some people won't change, some will double down, but that's not the point. The point is that you've honored your boundaries. You've shown up for yourself. That's powerful. And here's another thing, when you address behavior directly, you teach others how to communicate with you. You set the tone. You model what respect looks like. This doesn't just benefit you, it creates a ripple effect. When people see you handle disrespect with grace and strength, they're inspired to do the same. I want to be clear, this isn't about being confrontational for the sake of it. It's not about calling out every little thing that bothers you. It's about discernment. It's about knowing when to speak up and when to let things go. Not every battle is worth fighting, and not every slight requires a response. But when the disrespect is persistent, when it undermines your dignity or self-worth, that's when you address it. And you do it directly, with clarity and purpose. This is a skill, and like any skill, it takes practice. You won't always get it right. There will be moments when you walk away wishing you'd handled things differently. That's okay. Growth isn't linear. The important thing is that you keep trying, that you keep showing up for yourself. So the next time someone disrespects you, don't react impulsively. Pause. Reflect. And when you're ready, address the behavior. Speak your truth, even if your voice shakes, because in those moments, you're not just defending yourself, you're defining yourself. You're showing the world and yourself what you stand for. Let's talk about relationships for a moment. Every relationship we have in life contributes to shaping who we are: friendships, partnerships, work relationships, and even those random encounters. But not every relationship deserves a place in our lives, especially the ones that undermine our sense of self-worth. Today, I want to speak directly about what happens when we encounter people who don't respect us and why evaluating the relationships in our lives is crucial. When someone disrespects you, it's not just about what they said or did, it's about what it does to your inner world. Disrespect has a way of creeping into our confidence, making us second-guess ourselves. It's subtle, but over time, it starts eating away at your self-respect, your happiness, and your ability to see your own worth. The first thing I need you to understand is this: you are not obligated to maintain relationships that diminish you. We often find ourselves stuck in the trap of thinking we need to keep certain people in our lives because of history, shared experiences, or because that's just how they are, but history alone isn't enough to justify keeping toxic people in your circle. History doesn't mean you owe someone access to your life. Respect isn't something you should have to beg for. It's a fundamental requirement for any healthy relationship. If someone can't offer you that, you have every right to step back and reassess their place in your world. And I get it. Sometimes it feels impossible to cut ties with people who've been in your life for years or who are in positions of power, like a boss or even a family member. But here's what I need you to focus on: respect is a two-way street. If someone isn't meeting you halfway, you're not walking the same path. No matter how much effort you put in, the relationship will remain one-sided. That's not a relationship, that's a transaction where you're giving and they're taking. You don't need people in your life who take without reciprocating. Now, let's dig into what it means to evaluate a relationship. This is not about making rash decisions. It's not about cutting people off at the first sign of trouble. No, this is about taking a moment to step back and ask yourself some hard questions. How does this person make me feel? Do I feel seen, heard, and valued when I'm with them? Do they contribute to my growth or do they hold me back? Are they willing to have honest conversations or do they deflect and deny responsibility? These questions are the foundation of understanding whether a relationship is worth saving or if it's time to let go. Let me tell you a story. A friend of mine once worked for someone who constantly belittled him. No matter what he did, it wasn't good enough. He stayed in that job for years, convincing himself it was normal, that this was just part of the real world. But every time he left the office, he felt smaller, less capable, and less motivated. One day he sat down and asked himself, is this really the kind of relationship I want to have with my boss? That question changed everything. He realized he couldn't grow in an environment that didn't respect him. So he quit. And you know what? He went on to find a job where his talents were appreciated, where his contributions were celebrated. Leaving that toxic relationship wasn't easy, but it was necessary for his growth. You see, evaluating a relationship isn't just about cutting people out. It's about making room for the right people to come in. Every moment you spend trying to force a relationship with someone who disrespects you is a moment you're not spending with someone who values you. Imagine how much better your life could be if you redirected that energy toward people who lift you up, who inspire you, and who make you feel like you're capable of achieving anything. But here's the tricky part sometimes. The people who disrespect us are the ones we love the most. It could be a close friend, a family member, or even a partner. And when that happens, the decision becomes so much harder. You find yourself torn between loyalty and self-respect. But let me tell you something, loyalty doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. Loyalty means being honest, setting boundaries, and holding people accountable for their actions. And if they can't rise to the occasion, then your loyalty belongs to yourself first. You can't pour from an empty cup, and staying in a toxic relationship will only drain you. Now let's talk about guilt, because I know it creeps in when we start thinking about walking away from someone. You might feel like you're abandoning them or that you're being too harsh. But here's what I want you to remember: walking away from disrespect isn't cruel, it's necessary. You're not punishing them, you're protecting yourself. There's a difference. And if someone truly cares about you, they'll reflect on their actions, they'll make an effort to change. But if they don't, that tells you everything you need to know. Evaluating relationships also means recognizing patterns. One-off mistakes can be forgiven, but repeated disrespect is a choice. And if someone chooses to disrespect you time and time again, they're showing you who they really are. Believe them. Don't fall into the trap of thinking you can change them or that they'll suddenly start treating you better. Change has to come from within them, not from your efforts. You might wonder, what if they don't mean it? What if they're just having a bad day or dealing with their own struggles? That's a valid question. And yes, everyone has bad days. But there's a difference between occasional lapses and a pattern of behavior. It's not your job to fix someone else's issues at the expense of your well-being. Compassion has its limits, and it should never come at the cost of your self-respect. And let's not forget about accountability. When you evaluate a relationship, part of the process is giving the other person a chance to step up. Have an honest conversation. Tell them how their actions have affected you. Sometimes people don't realize the impact of their behavior until it's pointed out. But if they dismiss your feelings, if they refuse to take responsibility, then it's clear they're not interested in mutual respect. And that's your cue to move on. Walking away from a toxic relationship is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. But it's also one of the most liberating. It's a declaration to yourself that you deserve better, that you're not willing to settle for less than you're worth. And trust me, once you let go of the people who don't respect you, you'll start to see just how much you've been holding yourself back. You'll feel lighter, freer, and more open to the relationships that truly matter. Remember, you have the power to choose who gets access to your life. Not everyone deserves a front row seat. Some people are meant to be in the background, and some aren't meant to be there at all. And that's okay. Life is too short to spend it surrounded by people who don't value you. So take a deep breath, evaluate your relationships, and make the choice that aligns with your self-worth. You'll thank yourself for it. Let's talk about respect. It's something we all crave, something we all deserve, yet, unfortunately, not something we all receive. Every one of us has had moments where we felt dismissed, undervalued, or outright disrespected. And when that happens, it stings. It shakes our confidence and makes us question ourselves. But what if I told you that how you handle disrespect isn't about them, it's about you? Let's start with a truth that's often hard to swallow. People treat you based on how they perceive you, and sometimes their perception is entirely about them and not about you. That person who interrupts you, undermines you, or ignores your voice, they might be projecting their own insecurities, frustrations, or fears. But the question is, how do you respond to that? Because the way you respond defines not only how they'll continue to treat you, but also how you feel about yourself. One of the most powerful things you can do is to set boundaries. Boundaries aren't about controlling others, they're about teaching others how to treat you. Imagine you're building a fence around your garden not to keep people out, but to protect what you've cultivated. That's what boundaries do. They say, this is what I will tolerate. This is what I won't, and here's the thing, boundaries aren't negotiable. They're not up for debate. When you articulate them clearly and enforce them consistently, you're sending a message not just to others, but to yourself that you value your dignity and worth. But what happens when someone crosses that boundary? What happens when you're disrespected despite your best efforts? That's when staying calm and composed becomes critical. Let me tell you, there's strength in silence. There's power in not reacting immediately. When you let anger or frustration dictate your response, you're giving the other person control over you. Staying calm doesn't mean you're passive or weak. On the contrary, it's a sign of self-mastery. It's saying, I won't let you disturb my peace. And then you address the behavior directly. You don't avoid it, you don't let it fester. Instead, you confront it with courage and clarity. And when I say confront, I don't mean with aggression or hostility. I mean with honesty. When someone disrespects you, call it out. Say, I felt dismissed when you spoke to me that way, or I found that remark hurtful, and I want to understand why you said it. Notice the difference between blaming someone and inviting a dialogue. It's not about putting them in their place, it's about showing them what place you expect them to hold in your life. Now, this part might be the toughest. Sometimes you'll do everything right, you'll set boundaries, stay calm, and address the issue, and they still won't change. That's when you have to evaluate the relationship. Is it worth your energy? Is it worth your time? Not every relationship is meant to last. Not every connection is worth preserving. And that's okay. Walking away from someone who consistently disrespects you isn't a failure, it's an act of self-respect. It's choosing your peace over their toxicity. It's choosing yourself. But here's where I want to focus most of our time today, leading by example. Because this, my friends, is the game changer. When someone disrespects you, it's tempting to respond in kind. They're rude, so you're rude back. They're dismissive, so you ignore them too. But what does that accomplish? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Instead, it perpetuates a cycle of negativity. If you want respect, you have to show respect even to those who don't seem to deserve it. I know what you're thinking. Why should I respect someone who disrespects me? Why should I be the bigger person? Here's why, because respect isn't about them. It's about you. It's about the standards you set for yourself. It's about the example you want to set for others. When you lead with respect, even in the face of disrespect, you're showing everyone, not just the person in question, but everyone around you, what kind of person you are. You're saying, I won't stoop to your level because I know my worth. Think about a leader you admire, someone who inspires you, someone who commands respect. Do they lash out when they're challenged? Do they belittle those who oppose them? No. Great leaders lead with grace. They show strength not by overpowering others, but by uplifting them. They demonstrate that respect isn't conditional, it's a reflection of character. And let me tell you, people notice. Even if the person disrespecting you doesn't change, others will see how you handle yourself. They'll see your poise, your patience, your integrity. And that earns real respect, the kind that lasts. Because respect isn't about demanding it. It's about deserving it. It's about earning it through your actions, your words, and your demeanor. Now, leading by example doesn't mean being a doormat. It doesn't mean tolerating bad behavior or letting people walk all over you. You can be kind and firm, you can be respectful and assertive. It's about finding that balance, about standing your ground while maintaining your grace. Let me share a story with you. There was a young man who worked in a company where his boss constantly belittled him. Every idea he brought to the table was dismissed. Every success he achieved was downplayed. It was exhausting. He felt invisible, unappreciated. But instead of retaliating, he chose to lead by example. He continued to do his best work. He treated his boss with the respect he wished he'd receive. And over time, something remarkable happened. His colleagues started noticing his professionalism, his calm under pressure. They began to rally around him, to support him. Eventually, his boss started to take notice too. And while the boss never apologized, he began to treat the young man differently, with more consideration, more respect. That's the power of leading by example. It doesn't always result in an immediate change, but it creates a ripple effect. It influences others in ways you can't always see. And most importantly, it allows you to hold your head high, knowing you stayed true to yourself. So the next time someone disrespects you, ask yourself, what kind of example do I want to set? What kind of legacy do I want to leave in this moment? Because every interaction is an opportunity to show the world who you are. Don't let someone else's behavior define you. Define yourself. When you lead with respect, when you model the behavior you want to see, you're not just changing the dynamic, you're changing the narrative. You're saying, I refuse to let negativity dictate my actions. I choose integrity. I choose dignity. I choose respect. And that, my friends, is the ultimate power. It's the power to rise above, to inspire, and to lead.